Well, welcome to weekly Roundup. I'm here with Carol, and we are here to unpack what's been going on in the yoga and wellness world and what we've been coaching our clients through in this last week. I'd like to say live, but we've just been having some tech glitches, and so here we are. Anyway, sometimes you just have to make do with what you have. So I am actually at our client My Yoga in Den Haag in the Netherlands, one of our client, Lydia, longtime client. I'm here doing a 4-day yoga sales boot camp, and it is super exciting. And I've decided I think I want to move to the Netherlands because it is super cool. And one thing you have to watch out for is bicycles. Yes, they bike everywhere. It is amazing. I mean, it's just all the different kinds of bikes, and everywhere you look, there's bicycles. And I guess Lydia said to me, there's no such thing, someone said, what about when the weather's bad? It's like, there's no such thing as bad weather. It's just, it's just bad clothing choices. It's just like, right? I thought that
Gotta have the right gear, right?
yeah, having the right gear. It's like anything, having the right gear makes all the difference in the world. So Carol, what's been happening in the United States with your clients? We were talking before we went live that you had a couple of interesting things with some of your clients, and I think it's a good topic.
Yeah. So it came up a couple times recently, just in the last week or so. Two clients were looking at either expanding to a bigger space or taking it to a second and third location, and I guess the question is, when are you ready for that? How do we know? Is it just like an intuition thing? Do we need to look at numbers? I think it's a little bit of both for sure. But yeah, it's a pretty big leap, I think, to go from, maybe even doubling the size of what you already have, or, opening a second location or maybe even a third. And so there are, I know from my experience, we ended up opening a second location in the St. Louis area. And then after about 4 years, we ended up selling it. It was like we really didn't have our processes really dialed in at that point. And it was fine. Like it wasn't like this big like boon for us, but it like served more people, gave people more yoga. And yeah, I think that, like knowing what I know now, I would feel much more confident in opening more locations, or expanding. But I also think too, if I just had our current location and had the opportunity to like have a second room, or
Yeah.
like just build out what I already had, that also is, I think, more of the route I would go first over opening a second location. But
Yeah, that's always an interesting conundrum is, like you said, when do you open, what determine it, and what do you use to determine? And I think a lot of it is numbers, and even beyond gut, unless something like just lands in your lap. And occasionally that, like this amazing opportunity opens up, kind of like you'd be dumb not to take it kind of thing. But more to the point, I think I often wonder if it's like when people like cancel a membership and go, because this is the new bright, shiny object. It's like, oh, I want to increase rent because I'm going to open another studio because that's really fun and exciting. And is that the reason? I think starting with, again, let's go back to what's your why? Why do you want to open a second location? And then what's your why? Once you've determined what the why is, then what are the numbers? And if you're not paying yourself at your one location, why would you open a second studio at another location, right? So I think and as you said, Carol, getting the processes in place, because if you don't have the processes in one location, and I know you can speak to this and tell me if you think I'm wrong, is that it's not that it gets exponentially harder. I think if you don't have everything dialed in, and then you open a second location, because now you can't be in two places at once. And maybe that's where you start seeing all the cracks in the foundation, because it's like, oh my gosh, we can manage what, but now we've got this. And then if you're opening a third, so I would say, are you financially solvent? Are you paying yourself? Do you have the cash reserve to do a build out, whether you're expanding or going to another location? And then also looking at, I have a client right now that is looking to expand, and it just happened. So what she did, first step, because she was going to build a second room, but then an opportunity came up to buy a building and build out a new location. And she opted for that route because, again, building at a whole second hot room, you got all that money invested in a building that you don't own. So then that's where buying a building, then get that going, and then looking to expand locations. But having the financial resources, or at least the capital, are you profitable? What are the, and then why are you going to do it? What's your plan?
Yeah. I mean, for me, always, not always, but the big crux of it is the money. Like, can you prove it out? Like if you're not, independently wealthy and can just fund it yourself, you're going to have to go to a bank, get an SBA loan. I don't know, who's going to, some family, I don't know. You got to figure out how to pay for that build out. And if your first or only or one location isn't proving itself, that's going to be really, really difficult to get funding for it. And yeah, it's a hard thing to, like, I always wanted to pay off any of our loans or lines of credit or anything as quickly as possible. That's just the way I like to feel, and so, but yeah, owning a building, that's a really, if your business can fund that, and then over time, then maybe you have space for rentals, so you could actually be a landlord.
Or 100%, and or you eventually sell the business but keep the building.
Yeah.
And then you're the landlord and you collect the rent.
Mm-hmm.
And again, having the client that I'm speaking of, she got an SBA loan she got a loan to purchase the building. And then, she saved and has, I believe, has the money to do the build out. But that's a big part of it, is the financing. And then also, what's the why? I mean, if your existing location, it's just like, when do you add a class? When you're 80% full, 80% of the time, that's when you can look at adding classes to your schedule, unless, of course, it's a very strategic thing, right? Where you're trying out a new class or something like that. But that's a good general rule of thumb that we coach to. And so same thing about, okay, am I looking to open or expand? If you're only like that 50% or less capacity most of the time, then why not? And this is where I think sometimes, like, oh, we want the bright shiny object, let's do this over here. Is why not spend the money and resources rather than spending a huge chunk of change to either expand or buy or move or build a new building? Is let's build up so we get to that point, and then we can decide if this is something that we want to do. Because the other thing too, Carol, is, and I know Josh knows a woman that's, I believe, in Canada, is there can be a time where you're like, you know what, I'm good with one location. I'm good where I'm at. The studio is full, it's humming. And I don't know the name of the studio or anything, but this woman she built it up very successfully. And now nobody even knows, most people don't even know she owns the studio, because she doesn't teach there anymore. She has a team in place running it. She just, pays herself from that. She just goes in and practices. And it's like, she's happy with that. And there's nothing wrong with that as well. It's like, that's why I think you need to determine your why.
Yeah.
And I mean, like you said, Carol, you did open a second location, decided, sold it. And then what did you do after you sold that second location? Then what did you and your business partner do?
Well, it was at a time we both had very young children. Like, when we opened it, I think she had her daughter and I hadn't had my son yet. So it was just sort of like, it felt like the right time to expand. And then a few years later, now she has a second child, I have a baby. It was too much. And again, we didn't have the processes, but I think, again, I would have
Not as
done a
defined
lot
as they
more.
were.
Exactly. It wasn't as tight, it wasn't as strong. And so, we wanted our why was, we want to do one really, really, really well.
Yeah.
And we can focus on one and do really, really well with other, with the other things that are going on in our life right now. We just need to get rid of this one. And it was the right time. We found a buyer and, worked out. So, and it's kind of funny because it's one of those like, wow, we actually did have to do that. I kind of forget about it because it was that little blip in this long road of business
Yeah.
ownership. But yeah, we wanted to really focus our energy, and I think it was just a
On
hard
one
time.
location, and it also sounds like with young children on your families. So
Yeah.
again, you strove for a work-life balance.
Yes. Yeah.
And I had a conversation with with a client about the same thing, looking to expand. And right now, typically a lot of studios owners, very hands-on, people know, or things like that. I'm like, well, if you expand multiple locations, you're not going to have that experience at those other studios. When you add additional studios, is never, in my opinion, you can, because you've owned a second studio, I've never have, but it's like you can only be in one place at a time. So
Mhm.
of course you have your original studio, that's where they grew up with you, and you know, for want of a better term, right? Then you go to another location and it's a lot of new, you don't have that same connection. So then you have to look at it, oh, is this the experience I want? Am I thinking, oh, I'm going to have all this? But reality is, once you have multiple locations, it can't be about you.
Yeah, you have to start, you really are forced to ascend to the
Yes,
next. If you're not, if you're already in, when we look at our accountability charts, there's sort of
right.
like four levels in it. And a lot of the owners we work with are all four levels. They're leadership,
Yes.
they're managers, they're doers, they're everything in between.
Yeah.
And you have to sort of force yourself up to up level, because otherwise, like you said, like you can't be two places at once, you can't be three places at once, and you got to have people in place that are doing the things for you. So maybe your role even is, maybe becomes almost like a regional manager, or you have to hire a regional
Yeah.
manager, and then your role is truly in like the CEO level,
Right.
and that's
Or
not
even
always
like president of the board, right?
right.
And like really ascend to that. Because also when you get bigger like that too, one thing you absolutely going to have is some type of HR.
Yep.
Right? Because, if you have multiple locations, you're going to have quite a bit of staff, and therefore you need someone to manage it. Therefore, that's the other thing. If that's something you want to do, and also, even if you never want to do that, if you're right now early on in your yoga journey, or whether you've been doing it and you don't have that, as Carol mentioned, the accountability chart defined, you darn well better get that defined if you're planning to open another location. Because if you don't, it's just going to be chaos. It's just going to be absolute chaos. And having, like you said, Carol, having everything dialed in, including, and then we've talked a lot about this lately, is your product definition and what is your brand identity, and really building your brand. Like we've talked a lot about this with my yoga, is, this is the brand. We have to build this brand in the community, and the product is the brand. So what is that look like? So all of these things really need to be dialed in before, I would suggest you even considering opening a second location or even expanding, you know. And the biggest thing is you got to have the money, and you got to have a plan, and the numbers have to be there.
Yeah, it's actually, you said something that triggered a memory from me. I know we've worked with studios with multiple locations, and the staffing, that's really, really challenging sometimes to keep enough yoga teachers. I mean, you need somebody that is pretty much dedicated to like finding talent, nurturing that talent, therefore, making sure that your product is being delivered the way that you want it delivered. So that might be a whole new seat that you have to create. And yeah, I think that's what I understand from what I'm hearing from studios with multiple locations is one of the biggest challenges.
Hashtag Carrie's dad, your biggest asset are your employees, and your biggest pain in the ass are your employees. It's human
Yeah.
beings. Yeah, we had a client a while back that had a couple of locations, and they chose to, and you can do this, they outsource their HR.
Mm.
So they didn't have someone internally doing that. So they outsourced it to a professional HR company, and that's all they do. And they were the ones that did the hiring, the onboard, they would like do the initial screen, and then the owner would do the final interview and then decide, or her management team would. And then they're the ones that did the onboarding. They got everything set up. They're the ones that did like processed the evaluations, all that stuff. And importantly, they were the ones that did the offboarding. And if there were any issues, they were the ones that would step in and do the like, okay, Carol, this is the second time that you're late, blah, blah, blah. So, that's the other thing you can do too, is with some of the, like a lot of us, I mean, most of us, I would think, have at least someone do our taxes, like an accountant. I did my own bookkeeping for years until the last year. I was like, okay, now it's time to pass this off to somebody. I actually like doing the books because it's Yoga Studio is pretty simple. It's like, you don't have accounts receivable, it's money, but I enjoyed it. But then it was like, okay, now it's time to put it off to somebody, but I never did my taxes. No, I wasn't, again, hashtag Terry's dad, you can mess with God, but not with the IRS. So these are all things that need to be considered. And it made me think of when you were saying that, Carol, is that years ago back in my hometown where I grew up, there was a restaurateur, and with a bright shiny object, this is exactly what he did. He was a restaurateur. He was a very successful, but what he did is he had an idea for a brand, like a theme or a brand for a restaurant, and he loved getting the restaurant up and going and doing all that, deciding on the architecture and the colors and the texture and the type of food and doing all hiring. He would get it up, and then like 2 years later, when it was running successful, he'd sell it and he'd open the next one. And that was his jam. His jam was, he loved the beginning part of it. He didn't want to keep it. He didn't like the sustainability part of it, which is why I oftentimes say that bright, shiny object, if you're saying, oh, wow, it would be, because it is sort of thrilling, right? When you're opening something new, when you're trying something new. But if the other one isn't going well, then why would you want to repeat it in another one, right? I got to cough for a second.
Yeah. It's actually kind of making me think of that book we read, 10 times is easier than 2 times 2x.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah.
Like focus on what you do like. That's a perfect example of somebody saying like, I don't love that part of the business, but I do love this part and I'm really good at it. So you just do that thing over and over and replicate it, and
you hire people to do those things that the
that you
things
don't want
that you're like, yeah, 10x is better. 10x is easier or better than 2x. If you're going to 10x your business, it's actually easier than 2x. And then, like you said, it's like the 20% that you do really well, that's what you focus on. And then you find somebody to pay somebody to do the stuff that's not, because then that frees you up to do the things you're really good at, which is why the accountability chart is important, right? And we talk about this too. It's like, how much is your time worth? What is your time worth by the hour? And then, okay, would I pay somebody that much an hour to do it? And a lot of times you could probably pay somebody less than
way less.
Way less. Right? Like cleaning your studio. Seriously, if you are still cleaning your studio, there's a problem there, because you could hire somebody to clean your studio for far less than what you pay yourself. And certain things, it's like, okay, I'm going to pay somebody to do this because now I can focus on this. And again, sometimes I think, and I know I was guilty of this, is we like to do the things we like that are fun. For me, working the front desk, I love to work my front desk. And it was, and when I was working my front desk, I wasn't doing the things that I really should do, that were like the more things that I wasn't so great at and didn't like to do. And so I'm like, oh, I got to work I use that as an excuse. Oh, I got to work the front desk. And then finally, like, oh, Terry, this is silly. My coach is like, Terry. So I had front desk.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah. So sometimes looking at your resistance to something, is it because this is what you really like to do, because you're avoiding doing the things that you need to do?
Yeah.
And maybe it's like, oh, I don't have time to do this because I have to do all these tasks things instead of the vision things.
Well, and it also makes me think of, and I've said this before, when we started to prepare our business for a sale, that also forces you to look at it in terms of like, would somebody want to come in and work the front desk? Like maybe they do, maybe they love it just as much as you do, but really if you can pay somebody less than what your hourly rate is, get those systems in place, and then again you ascend to that visionary role or the higher level, where you can actually have time to spend working on your business. That makes the business way more what's the word I'm looking for, it's more successful and more attractive
Sustainable
to a
and more
person. Yeah, and sustainable.
sustainable, attractive to, if it, when you decide to sell,
Hmm.
it makes it more attractive
Yeah.
to a potential buyer when all they have to do is step in, it's successful, you've got a team in place, you're paying yourself. And they're like, yeah, this is a viable business. I can just buy into it and keep the ball rolling kind of thing. Yeah,
So that's
100%.
why a lot of times I'll even talk to my studio owners that aren't interested in selling right now, but we do talk about if you look at it with that lens, like you might not be ready now or in 5 years or 10 years, but like you always talk about having an exit strategy is a
Important.
idea, super important. And if you look at it with that lens of what would I have to do to get it prepared for sale,
Mhm.
then you'll actually have a better running business and you'll probably be less involved in that day to day
Yeah.
so that you can, work on the bigger vision,
Yeah, because I always said, and I've said, people always said, Terry, when did you decide to sell your business? It's the same as with the day I bought it.
Yeah. I
Right?
love
Because
that.
I knew my long-term strategy. I knew what my exit strategy was going to be because I didn't have family in New England, knew I wanted to be, and so I knew from the very beginning that I was going to sell it one day. But even if you don't plan to do it, it's like, okay, at some point in the future, let's say you start like you guys did, you started when you were in your 20s, and it's like at some point, okay, you decide to exit. So it's like, now what? It's like all of a sudden you get to your 50s or whatever, and you're like, holy smokes, I haven't done, it's like, I want to have something that I can sell or maybe pass on if you have a child that grows up in the business that you can actually, make it a family business. And it's like, oh, now my son or my daughter could come into the business and now they can take over the reins and they can start running this business. And then I can just sort of, back out. Although it should not look like Succession. It should definitely not look like Succession.
I've
Well,
never
I don't know
actually
if you,
watched Succession, but
I watched like the first few episodes. I was just like, oh my God, this is just so dysfunctional. I just can't deal with it. But here's an interesting fact. I don't know if it's still true. This is old data, but I would imagine it's probably fairly close. Is like, one of the data points is like something close to 80% of all small businesses in the United States fail within the first 3 to 5 years. And then 90, it's like closer to 95% for restaurants. It's one of the highest businesses that doesn't survive. So then when you look at a businesses, if like going from one generation to the next, from first to the second generation, something like 50% of the businesses fail in the second generation. Then if you look from a second generation to a third generation, of that 50%, then like another 50% fell. And then you even get to the fourth generation, then it's like 5% will make it. And a lot of that has to do with succession planning. And the fact that, more generations are involved in the business, the more family is involved in the business. Like if it's a father that owns it, and has like if we had kept, my father had kept his business, it's like he had 2 kids in the business.
yeah.
And then if we had taken it over, then there was 2 of us. And then my brother has, now I never had kids, but my brother has 4 kids. And if it passes, and then they have, so that's part of it too. And now I'm going way off topic. Anyway. Okay. So recap. Carol, what's the recap on this? What would you say are the key takeaways from our conversation about whether you should expand or whatever?
Expanding or not? Well, cash flow,
Cash flow
and your why.
and your why.
What's your why? Why,
Yep.
what's the idea of that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
processes.
cash flow, why, and having your processes in place.
Exactly.
Those 2 things.
Yeah.
Cool. And part of your processes is one very important. You can see how I'm going to loop this in, Carol. One
Go
of the
for it.
important processes we know is our first visit flow, right? And our first visit flow involves both the front desk position and the teacher position. And in some studios, the front desk and the teacher role, the front desk role is done by the teacher. So the teacher sits in both seats. And one of the reasons, the whole impetus of this trip for me coming to Europe for 3 weeks was with my client, Lydia, my yoga. She just finished up a 26 and 2 teacher training in Portugal. And we were talking about it last summer, and I said, gee, wouldn't it be great if it was somewhat of like a lark? I was like, gee, wouldn't it be great if I came out and I could do a presentation? I could do our soulful sales presentation. What better time to do a presentation and to potential yoga teachers who have no preconceived notions about what they shouldn't do as a yoga teacher? And she's, yeah, we should talk about that. Fast forward, we made it work. And then it's like, well, since you're going to be over here, why don't you come to my studio? So that was sort of how this whole thing came to play. So I did that last week. I did basically the training that we do when we go to a yoga studio and walk them through. We actually, Carol, we even did role play. I took the basic script and we actually did role play as if they were the teacher, hey, what most people do. The feedback from the teacher trainers was overwhelmingly positive. They loved it. And I went into like, what were the numbers as a teacher you should be aware of? I said, now, if you went to a student, can you imagine if someone had come to you and you were hiring as a yoga teacher, say, hey, Carol, I would really love, in the interview process, I'm curious, Carol, just so I can help with my planning in my classes, what's the minimum number of people do I have to have in my class for it to be profitable for you?
That would blow some studio owners' minds.
I mean, it'd be like, and I said to him, you want to, I said, ask that question. And if they can't tell you, then send them our way. That's what I said, right? So they were just like, and the first visit return rate and all of that stuff and how many people come in actually end up on membership. They were super fascinated by it, which just goes to show you that if they don't have that preconceived thing, then they're very open. They're like little sponges. They like absorbed it. And then we talked about why sales is important. They really got it. And then to make it even more powerful is a couple of the people that attended the training last week were from Lydia's studio, and they would like to eventually teach here. So Lydia invited them to come to the role play sessions that we've been doing here at her location. And 3 of them have come and they were so into it. So again, now Lydia's got these 3 potential teachers who probably are going to teach for her that have been through the teacher training. They've actually been through the sales training. They've actually done role play. They actually understand the importance of their job as a yoga teacher and how they need to be at the desk. Amazing.
I mean, that's like unicorns.
Yeah.
But Lydia created that. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's so amazing for her to not only have trainees that have come from her training in that lineage, but then also to have the sales
Yeah.
under their belt and like they're excited about it and
Yeah.
like those are the kinds of teachers that you want on
You
your
want it, you
yeah
want on your
yeah.
team.
It doesn't matter that they're new, they're
Yeah.
hungry, they're
They're
excited, they're
hungry, they're
into
this.
it.
Yeah, and we talked about being a professional yoga teacher and what that means and all that kind of stuff. And then the other thing that I think is also really amazing about this. Oh God, what was the thought? I know I had another senior moment, Carol. What were you just saying about? Oh geez, I lost it. It was went out of my brain. The training, the role play, the understanding that. Oh, it's gone. I had this amazing comment to make,
I'm sure it'll return.
it'll probably return as soon as we hang up. But it was really delightful to see how engaged and how enthused they were. So again, it just goes to show you, we shouldn't have this, yoga teachers shouldn't sell. Yeah, they absolutely should know how to sell, know the importance of selling, understanding it, just being able to just be comfortable with saying, hey, what most people do.
Yeah.
And when someone says, well, I just want to try it. Hey, I get wanting to try it. Actually, that's why we recommend ... because then you can try it as much as you like for a whole week or a whole month or whatever it is, right? So they got that's part of what their job potentially could be.
Yeah.
And even if you have a studio where there's desk staff at every shift, they still understand these people these YTT graduates understand their role in the process of the first visit flow, and that they should understand the front desk role as well. And I absolutely said they are equal in position. There's no hierarchy that the yoga teachers up here in the front desk, you just do front desk down here. No. I told them, Don't think that, because they're equally as important. In fact, they are with good front desk. This is why they sell, and this is why the doors stay open, and this is why it gives you well. So one could almost argue that they are more important than the yoga teacher, right? But like they're equal, at minimum equal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good for everyone to have that bigger picture, you
Yeah,
know,
exactly. Understand the bigger.
and you know where you land in that flow, in that process, and how your role contributes to that bigger picture.
Yeah. Well, if any of those of you have ever been in the military, wasn't, but it's like, you know, the job of the person above you, so that if something you can, or somebody else's job, like, so that if something happens, you can do that job. So it's about understanding how the team works, understanding the job, so that if necessary, so even if you do have front desk at your studio, understanding that role. So if the front desk, let's say, calls in sick and there's nobody on helping you desk your shift, that you understand how you can step in and help and not just be all thumbs about it, kind of thing. Well, I actually have to go because I am going to teach a class tonight, which is like so exciting. I actually taught, this is the second class I've taught this week, and I haven't actually taught a full-on 90-minute class in an actual hot room since before the pandemic started in 2020. So it's been really rewarding, and it's amazing how those words come back: arms over the head sideways.
Come right back
Interlocking
to
positions.
you.
It's like ride a bicycle. All right, well, that's a wrap for this week's weekly roundup. Listen live. Hopefully next week we'll be live every Thursday morning right here on Facebook, or subscribe to Studio Cult TV on Spotify. We are now on Spotify. Carol, do you feel like a rock star? I kind of feel like a rock star. We're on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening from. And we'll see you next week. Carol, thank you so much. Always fun to hang out with you. And yeah, I'll just one more quick thing. We have launched our summit, our visionary summit, in November. It's all over our website. If you're interested at all, just drop us a note in the comments below. We'd be happy to reach out to you, let you know all the deets if you've never been before. And yeah, go do some yoga. Bye, everybody.